nostalgia is probably something I can do.
Right.
Because I do nostalgia all the time.
So my specific thing, so the thing that stood out most from our last conversation, which I thought was just really amazing, because for some reason I had a completely different idea of how you came to be at RivalCast in the first place. So why don't you talk a little bit about, you weren't even involved with broadcasting at all. I mean, you were just...
Well, no, I've never... Well, like I say, okay, so I've not done any... I had never done any live radio or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I had built sounders and things. I've always done audio editing. I know how to do that kind of thing, like just manipulation of media. Not that sort of manipulation of media. I mean, like public relations sort of manipulation of media. I meant actual production. So yeah, I've made speaking of nostalgia, actually, I once made quite a nice nostalgia alert drop-in, which didn't get used ever.
Where is it?
Somewhere. If I can find it, then you're welcome to it. Yeah, but aside from that, I was mostly effectively like, listener, community member, and occasional email-based contributor.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of aspect of it, something that I'd say did really sort of refresh when he did Sheep Moon, or when Sheep Moon was brought to RTM. Because, he certainly likes reminiscing about World of Warcraft and stuff, and I've got a lot of old knowledge about that.
Mm-hmm.
To the point that I sound like, if I try to talk about it now, people are like, holy shit, you know nothing. So that's essentially it. I occasionally made stuff and sent to people that broadcast stuff, and occasionally it gets read or used.
Okay. So that's how you started, but then, so Shoutcast days were just about over. You were a fan, you were, watching these people that you listening to were going, off to their own venture. How did you get involved with building the website?
So this has a simpler answer than one might imagine, and that's I just got on with it and started building it when there was call for it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a case of group of people deciding that we need a separate entity, we need a website. Hear about it, because I did actually read the forum and gamed with them occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's how you don't hear about it. You have to be involved to hear about this sort of thing. Then it was a case of, we can't really, normally if I was trying to build a web page or a website or something like that, I would say, draw it, Photoshop it, point to existing websites and say, make it like that, to do this.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of give me something to work with. I can turn it into a web version. Now, obviously, but in this particular case, we didn't exactly have that luxury, because there wasn't going to be lots of designs made up and that kind of thing, because it's a case of I'm just a listener. There's no guarantee that if I say I'll start building something that I'll actually finish it.
Mm-hmm.
I did have to ask some questions and I basically said, just list the sort of thing that you imagine the end result would have. If at all you can say what the end result would appear, the sort of appearance it would have, then that's great, but otherwise just list the stuff that's needed. So I did actually, the list divulged that I could actually at least for something.
Mm-hmm.
And from that on I just started building and providing a link to a test sort of dummy server where the program could be viewed.
Basically blowing the minds of everybody that came in contact with this particular project, because I don't think I can say with absolute certainty, just from the opposite part of that whole scenario, because you didn't get to see what was going on in stateside while you were doing all this. But they were absolutely amazed that somebody would just take the time to bring it upon themselves, who wasn't, involved with any shows at that point and wasn't involved with anything much except, some forum posts and, doing this and that, from a fan perspective. But you really wowed the hell out of everybody who was on that project. And I just remember, like, shortly after it launched, like, there was one Emperor in particular who just raved about you, like, oh, you gotta meet this guy, and he does all this stuff, and look at what he built, and and I mean, just like on and on and on, and it made an impact. I mean, for somebody who's historically just been kind of quietly behind the scenes, you made a huge splash, and I don't think you quite understood at the time what it was going to grow into.
Let's say, talk about what it was going to grow into. I don't think anyone could have predicted that sort of thing. But I'd say the sort of site that it is now, at the time, were everything to continue at least somewhat as planned, then I would imagine that we'd end up with something like what we have now.
Okay. Let me see. What else do I want you to reminisce about? I'm trying to think of different things that are kind of like the hacks domain at RCM. And we had a brief conversation the last time we talked about how IRC is kind of like referred to as Hacks' house, because that's generally where you hang out, when you're online, and where we go to find you, and then...
Yeah, that's something I find kind of strange, since if you look at the sort of mobile usage of IRC, it's by Vival, Biomed Alchemist, the Olive, certainly.
Well, yeah, but to be
fair,
I
imagine I guess the that effect sort of comes about because, at Injecture, the others are available on other means of communication, whereas I'm only on IRC pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the fact remains that Olive and Viable are kind of always logged in, so just because they're logged in doesn't mean they're there. I mean, Bio's the same way. I mean, he's logged in, but you ping him and maybe he's there, maybe it's 3 hours later that you see hello.
At the same time, he does sort of read the backlog and always catch up. Olive's actually present way more than I would ever expect him to be present, but he is, which is quite cool. Vival's a bit more sporadic, although he'll also read up at times.